Hi everyone. I want to touch base about Unit 3, our final unit, and talk a little bit about the process of what's going on, what the proposal is going to look like, why we're doing the proposal, and then the instruction set, and kind of everything in between. So if we go back to the assignment sheet, which most of you at this point have looked at, I'm looking at your questionnaires. Quite a few of you are understanding where this project is coming from. I know a few people are still a little confused about that. So I want to talk a little bit about the big picture here. And the big picture is that using social media in the classroom is a really big debate right now, both in academia and with students. Quite a few academics want to meet students where the students are at. Students aren't hanging out in Blackboard, so maybe it's a better idea to reach them in Facebook where they're hanging out. Some students don't like that, right? Stay out of MySpace, right? Or stay out of Facebook. That's my life, you have your life. Some academics feel the same way too. They don't necessarily want students on their Facebook pages. But something like Facebook creates an opportunity that something like Blackboard doesn't create. Things for more streamlined conversations, posting all kinds of rich texts and media, linking and sharing easily from other sources that are coming in, having multiple streams, notifications, and all kinds of things. So there's pros and cons to everything. Even if we're talking about YouTube or Pinterest, Twitter, Skype, all of these things have pros and cons to them. And what we're looking at is the fact that we use an LMS, a learning management system, which may or may not be effective. I know from an instructor standpoint, I get quite frustrated with Blackboard. It has a lot of limitations. It's not intuitive. It changes from class to class depending on how things are set up, which means a lot of times students are left to be on a scavenger hunt for information. And it's not the same, like where if you were to walk into every Target, you know that in the back left-hand corner, there's these items, right? Same thing as you go into Facebook, you know what it always looks like every time you go in, or if you go into Pinterest, right? So there's a lot of debates that are happening, both using LMSs, using something like social media in the classroom. And so I'm trying to make an assignment where we have to cover these course objectives: creating an instruction set, creating a proposal, doing research, collaborating, and taking all of these objectives and turning it into something that's actually pretty relevant, whether you know it or not, into your educational setting. Because in this class, while we use some forms of social media, we have the blog on our Blackboard page, and we do use YouTube, in other courses, you might actually end up using things like Twitter or Pinterest. And so it's kind of a good idea to have an idea behind why this is happening and looking at these trends. Whether you're comfortable with it or not is a completely different issue, right? But that does come into the proposal part of things, because we have to take into consideration the fact that some people are not on Facebook, do not want to be on Facebook, and that could be required in a course. So how do you mediate that? So just kind of some things that I'm planting, big picture wise. So let's get a little more specific now, and let's talk about the actual project. So we have a proposal and we have the instruction set. And I know sometimes some students get confused as to why you would write a proposal for the instruction set. Why not just write the instruction set? And the analogy here is, if you were a general contractor and you were putting in a bid to build a house, you wouldn't build the house and then say, here, do you want this? You would have to create a bid. You'd create a proposal. You'd have to price out all the items. You'd have to kind of build some specs. You'd have to create a budget and do all of these things, and then compete with others that are doing the same thing, so that person who wants this house can then pick the one that they want. So in chapter 16, and I'm just going to hop into chapter 16 here, it talks about writing proposals for goods and services. And that's basically what this is. You're writing a proposal to deliver something. So you're writing a proposal to deliver an instruction set on how to use this tool in the classroom. So your proposal itself is a persuasive document. So what that means is, first off, There has to be a problem somewhere. And as I just discussed a moment ago, and I'm sure with your experiences in the classroom that you understand, Blackboard has some problems, right? It's not the end-all be-all. And the tools within Blackboard also have some problems. Now, it's good for a lot of things, so I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm not saying that we just need to throw Blackboard out the window or anything like that, but that's a good place to start. So if you're looking at how to use Pinterest in a classroom, and you'd be looking at Blackboard saying, well, there's some things that Pinterest can do that Blackboard can't do. Or if you're looking at Skype or Google Hangouts, you'd be looking at Blackboard's Collaborate and seeing how different they are and some of the problems and how these outside sources can really aid in the inside of the LMS. Now, there could be something like, let's say, Google Sites, where you could build your own website that could stand in the place of maybe Blackboard because it's so clunky. But it could also be another way for students to use that as opposed to Blackboard. Students don't get individual Blackboard shells, they get a course shell, right? So there's all these things that we can look at, and we can point all of these problems within Blackboard. Like it's not necessarily reliable, that sometimes it goes down, that there's too many upgrades, that it's clunky, that it's this, that it's that, that it's the next thing. Whatever it is for your project that's going to work. It's really individualized compared to your project and what you want to do with this project at hand. So you kind of have this crux, like this point to build your argument off of, is that Blackboard could be lacking, right, and or have some issues. Therefore, this outside source could be used within the classroom for a really specific means. And then you would be creating this instruction set, should you get the bid, on how to do that. So that's the idea behind this. So your proposal itself is not the instruction set, but it's the request to build that instruction set based on the approval of that proposal. So I'm hoping that's starting to make a little more sense. So that will be the deliverable. So you'll have the proposal saying, hey, we have this problem. We should be using this tool to kind of help put a Band-Aid on this problem, right? To fix this problem, to substitute anything along those lines. Here's how we can kind of see that happening. And we request to create an instruction set on that. Then that second part, once you've submitted that proposal, is to actually create the instruction set. So that's how all of this is scaffolded and how it all fits together. Now I want to take a minute and go ahead and we're going to look at the example proposal in the book and what that means for your project. So here's the deal. Don't reinvent the wheel. What I mean by that is we have a model, and just like we've been doing for everything else in the course, you're trying to copy the company's culture's model, right? So each company has its own kind of culture of how they do different things and how they scaffold their documents. So for this course, we've been using the book and the lectures as a way to scaffold, right? To follow those models. This is no different. I want you to use a Chapter 16 model as your model for your proposal. What this means is on the first page, it's set up as a memo. So I want the memo heading. I want the whole kit and caboodle. You should have a purpose statement. What is the purpose, right? It should have something really detailed about the purpose of this proposal is to, right, and goes on. It then has this summary. Now, this summary should be written last, and the reason being is because it is the summary of the document itself. You're going to notice that there's a lot of repetition as well in this document. So you set up the basic information that you were basically were asked to do this, so this is what you're doing. You give some background information on the actual problem, right? Like maybe something wrong with Blackboard and the growing trends of social media in the classroom, whatever that is for you. You then start to get to the heart of the problem and start really explaining what the purpose is here and what you're proposing to do, okay? From there, you're moving into the introduction. Now, you'll notice here where it says on September 26th, that first little paragraph right there, it's the same thing that's on the first page, okay? So you're just kind of copying and pasting that over. So So now we're getting into a bit more explanation of the problem, what's kind of happening, where we're going from here. You're looking at maybe some research questions that you were looking at in order to find out if this is the right tool, what's happening, how is it going to be used. And then we're coming down to some proposed tasks. The proposed tasks here are what you're going to do and why you're going to do them for the instruction set, not for the proposal. You've already done the proposal. But when we get into the proposed tasks for the instruction set, you really have to research what are you going to specifically be looking at? Why are you looking at these things? How are you going to be putting the instruction set together? In a way, it's kind of like a schedule, a plan of what you're going to be doing in order to create the instruction set, but it's also why you're going to be doing it. It's not just, I'm going to log into Facebook and take some photos because I need some photos. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And it's not the surface stuff. Okay, I want you to think about the nitty-gritty, the theories behind what you're doing and why you're doing it. Okay, so think about some of those things, and that's what your proposed tasks are going to be. Now look at the format, right? We have a lead out right before the header proposed tasks. We have a transition out. We then have a transition into the proposed tasks, and then we have our lead in that's italicized, followed by our text, right? You can bring in some of the research that you use about why you might be looking at certain things from some of the research that you've done, right? And kind of moving on. Now for here, the proposed tasks are a little bit longer, and you're going to see that that introduction is pretty short. Your introduction for this is probably going to be a little bit longer, because what you're doing is you're actually arguing that we should be doing something and taking a course of action. So you're going to have more research in this area. After proposed tasks, you're going to have a schedule. This is the schedule of the tasks for the instruction set, not the proposal. So it's the instruction set tasks that match, you'll notice here, with the proposed tasks, right? So task 1, research clicker use. Up here we have task 1, research clicker use, right? Okay. The experience here should be a bio of each person individually in your group. So what are your experiences? What makes you qualified to do this? And then your references. Now when we go to the assignment sheet, you'll see that we have the same things we just talked about. The header, the purpose statement, the summary, the introduction with some questions I have for you, some proposed tasks, the schedule, the experience, and the references. Now you will have an appendix. The appendix will include your tabulated questionnaire data and anything else that you might want to show in there. Okay. Again, don't recreate the wheel. I want you to follow this model. And look at how this looks. Your proposal should look really similar to this. So remember that this is a persuasive document in order to argue that we should be using this tool for a purpose. Now for some of you, it's a really specific purpose. It's using this tool for this kind of an assignment. So it's really tight. For some people, it's a little more broad. Here are some ways that we can use it. Here are some key features of it, right? So thinking about that and how you're putting this together. Now, as always, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I am here to answer your questions. For those of you that have been asking, you know that I do respond to them pretty quickly. So keep on the good work. I think right now everyone's feeling a little kind of, I don't want to say nervous, but you're kind of at the point where you're not really sure how this is all coming together and if you're on the right track. And I can say that most of you are on the right track. It's going to make much more sense hopefully after this video. Once you actually sit down to start writing, make sure that you're doing all the readings and that you're on top of that supplementary information. Don't forget that in the learning unit in week 1, I have these 4 articles where you do need to use one of those for your proposal. You also have several other sources of information, resources. So make sure that you're following up on that as well. If you have any questions, again, don't hesitate to ask. All right, I hope you all have a great weekend.